Hi, I'm Marie Elizabeth Molly, and today we're going to be talking about from comfortable to exciting, how growth leads to a better relationship. I'd love to know if you're here watching live with me, or if you're here with me watching live, please drop a hashtag live down below. I'd love to know who's here. And if you're watching the replay, if you're catching this later, whether you're in my Facebook group, on my page, I'm hoping my personal profile has showed up today. Facebook changed the API, and so it's really unclear to me if I'm actually broadcasting properly on Facebook. So it would help me a ton. If you're watching on Facebook, let me know that you're on Facebook so that I can be confident that it's showing up there. If you would like the show notes for today's episodes, drop notes in the comments to get access to that. I'd love to share them with you. And so let me know if you want that. Again, today we are talking with From Comfortable to Exciting, how growth leads to a better relationship. And I'm Marie Elizabeth Molly. I help women transform the patterns that have gotten in the way of having the love and connection they want in their relationships. So they go on to develop thriving, connected, juicy, fulfilling, growth-oriented relationships. And so this is a topic super dear to my heart. And that's why I'm bringing it to you today. I'm going to go over here and have the comments open. And so about growth, most couples eventually start to get stuck in a comfortable routine and they stop growing together. It's like every night after dinner, you sit down, you watch TV, then you go to bed at the same time every night, et cetera, right? You take the same route to work every day if you're driving to work, if you don't work at home like me. You put the same sock on first every day. There's so many ways that we get stuck in routine personally. And then as a couple, even more so, it's exponential. So if you're not growing together, if you're not individually growing, I want to say, and growing together, you're going to grow apart. It's going to get flat. It's going to get routine. That's not great for your relationship. So today we're going to talk about how growth can help your relationship flourish and how best to weave it into the fabric of your relationship. So you never have to let things get so bad that you have to do something dramatic to try to fix it. The first piece is to remember that ideally each person in the relationship is focused on their own growth. And you're supportive of each other's growth, but you're not having the relationship be entirely responsible for all the growth you do in your life. Relationships work much better when each person is tuned in to their growing edge. Each person is growing on their own, is growing how they show up in the world, growing professionally, growing physically, doing some kind of movement, say, or some kind of practice that has them, that has you feel good in your body. All of that requires that you have an individual focus on your own growth. And then the relationship can be a place where you each come together and share how you're growing, letting each other into your internal world and supporting one another in that growth. This can look like there was a period of time, for example, where Patrick really wanted to practice accessing anger more readily, not stuffing it immediately, but actually letting it out. And so we created a means in our relationship, space in our relationship for that, and created scenarios. I'm looking at the light because the sun has come out. My color has gotten crazy. Created scenarios where he could let his anger out more readily, and I was prepared to receive that and respond. Things like that. So he individually needed to work on a thing, and we worked on it in the relationship. That's one example of a way that you can be growing individually. I'm trying to think of one for myself. One for myself would be me learning how to catch my nervous system, how to catch myself before I get so ramped up that I'm critical and sniping and otherwise like a bitch to be around, to catching myself before that my stress gets to that level so that I can ask for help sooner, so that I can take responsibility for my own nervous system, do some kind of recalibration or some kind of self-regulation activity that brings me back down to a more resourced place. And the way Patrick in our relationship supports me in that is he might notice I'm ramping up before I do, or he might say, hey, here's a spot where you might want to bring it down a bit, something like that. So I'm responsible for the growth I want to do and the thing I want to change, but but we are a team in making that happen and pointing me to that work. Is that clear? So number one was ideally each person is focused on their own growth. Number two, come together on a regular basis to talk about how you're going to support each other in what you're each working on, as well as how you want to grow as a couple. Is there some new activity you want to incorporate into your relationship? Do you want to take a dance class, a cooking class? Is there a new restaurant you want to try? Is there a vacation you're dreaming about? Is there a book you might want to read to one another before bed? Maybe you alternate reading each night to one another a chapter of a book. These are all ways that you can grow together and shake up your routine. Number three, set a time to be open with one another, to have an open conversation about what feels routine or flat in your relationship. I suggest setting a time so you both show up prepared to have that conversation. So you've thought about it before, like what feels routine, and you're ready to have the conversation. And I also suggest being gentle with one another. In other words, don't get into blaming or you're doing this or you're doing that. Talk from the I perspective. I feel like blank. I've noticed that I'm doing blank. I've noticed that we do blank. But really keeping it from the I perspective, not getting into finger pointing or blame, because that's just going to derail the conversation super fast. Number four, once you're clear about what's routine and flat in the relationship right now, start brainstorming ways to change that. What might you be willing and excited to do to change it? If it's a way that one of you is showing up, that's the issue. Like one of you is just coming home and going straight to the TV and not interacting or whatever it is, then it's on that person to change it. How are you going to create accountability? When will you check in again about that thing? Create a timetable. Let's check in 2 weeks and see how this particular thing feels, etc. Is it a way that you've both been dialing it in? Have you both been automating some of your responses? And what's needed is that you both need to up your attention to one another. You need to up your attention to the connection, to the fabric of your relationship, and pour into that. Brainstorm ways to pour into your connection. If it's both of you who haven't been showing up, is there a way that is it a bandwidth issue? In other words, you're both so time and energy strapped that you don't have actual bandwidth to meet one another creatively. And you're just scraping by because that's, the minimum of attention that you have left at the end of the day, or at any point in the day for each other. Are you just scraping by with a minimum because that's all you got? In that case, could you get help for something that's on your plate? Can you hand anything off? Can you Get some support? Can you free up, find a way, think creatively to find a way to free up some bandwidth that you can then put toward the relationship? And if you're an entrepreneur and you're in a seasonal push, like you're in a launch or something like that, is there an end date? Can you commit to shifting and freeing up bandwidth for the relationship by a certain date, when your launch is over, when you can turn and put attention on the relationship? Talk about that, decide that together. That will feel a whole lot better than just continuing on to scrape by with the minimum because you're stretched so thin. I'd love to hear how this is landing with you. So drop a comment. Let me know a nugget, a takeaway, question. When you think about growth in relationship, what do you think about? What comes up for you? I'm curious. Because for me, I'm a growth-oriented person. And at some point, and so I'm always growing myself. And at some point, if the relationship stops growing, I'm going to grow out of it. And so I want to bring that to my partner. If I start feeling us heading that way, sometimes he's the one, sometimes Patrick is the one who starts feeling it heading that way. We bring it to each other. We don't just suffer in silence and keep drifting apart. We're just committed to growing together, individually growing and growing together, growing our union, growing the connection between us. It's helpful here to talk about this idea that there's each person in the relationship, and then there's the way these two people come together, which is the apex of the triangle, which is the union. So there's you, the other person, and then there's the relationship that lives and breathes between you. And it's as if that's another person. And it has its own needs. It has its own desires. It has its own ways that it wants to grow. And so when you have that kind of orientation where you're each growing and you're looking at, well, how can our union grow? What does our union want and need right now from us? It gets you out of the kind of, well, I'm working really hard and you're not doing anything. It gets you out of that sort of like one up, one down, critical, blaming kind of situation. And it gets you on the same team serving this thing between you. This morning, I was so moved because Patrick got up super early and flew back to Mexico. He just left today. And it's the last time we're going to see each other for a bit. And I just sat this morning and I took some time to reflect on all the ways that he showed me care yesterday and this morning, before he left. For example, he went to the store and bought a bunch of my favorite kombucha so that I would have it on my long work days, because it's hard for me to get to the store when I'm booked solid like today. He I'm spacing out the other one, but I sat this morning and just reflected on all the ways that he demonstrated care and demonstrated partnership actively before he left. He not only carried a bunch of things to Mexico for me, for the house, but he also did little things like buy me some kombucha, put the leftovers, we have some leftovers that I'm going to have for dinner tonight. He just organized some things for me in the sweetest way. And I just spent time this morning appreciating that. So I invite you to spend time doing that as well. That's not directly related to growth, but it's but it's a way of creating active appreciation for and with one another that serves your union, that serves your connection. If there are no questions, let me know if you have any questions, reflections, takeaways, comments. I'm going to recap really soon, but I want to give you a chance to chime in before that happens. So let me know. Today we're talking about moving from comfortable to exciting, how growth leads to a better relationship. Now, one of the things I want to say is people have different levels of growth orientedness. So that's another conversation that you could have, is to really determine, well, how growth oriented am I? How growth oriented am I? How much do you value comfort? How much do you value comfort? That was one of the things that was very different between my ex-husband and me, was really the reason we go to a relationship. I go to a relationship primarily to grow. So I'm always kind of looking for the next edge where I can expand. And he loves being a husband. He loves, and there's a way that he goes to the relationship, in my experience. I can't speak to his current wife, but in my experience, he goes to the relationship more for comfort. And sure, there's aspects of him that will grow by being in proximity to another human being. But his primary orientation is not about growth, whereas mine is. So there came a point 10 years ago where we no longer fit. Now, Patrick and I have been together for 7 years, and we are constantly growing. And sometimes we do go through periods where we settle into a routine and things get kind of slowed down and kind of sleepy. And then one or the other, or both of us will be like, oh, hey, this thing is happening. The connection between us feels kind of flat, and we'll do something about it. So if there's no questions coming in, I am going to recap. Today, we're talking about from comfortable to exciting, how growth leads to a better relationship. Most couples eventually get stuck in a comfortable routine and they stop growing together. And if you're not growing together, you're actually growing apart. And that's just not good for the relationship over time. Thank you. I heard this is very good advice. I appreciate that. Thank you. So in this video, you're going to find out how growth can help your relationship flourish and how best to weave growth into your relationship. The first point is, ideally, each person in the relationship is focused on their own growth, and you're supporting each other in that. How can the relationship support each of your individual growth? Second, you want to come together on a regular basis to talk about ways to support one another and in your individual growth, but also how to grow together. In other words, is there a new activity you want to learn? Do you want to take a dance class, a cooking class, read a book together, take turns reading a chapter from a book to one another out loud at night in bed? What book would you pick? Is there a vacation you're dreaming about, a new restaurant you want to try? All of these are ways to grow together, even as you're each pursuing your own growth. Number 3, be open with each other. Set a time to sit down and be open with each other about what feels routine or flat. I suggest you tread lightly and gently into this topic. If you haven't had a lot of frank conversations like this, you want to make sure you don't fall into finger pointing and blaming. You want to stay with I statements. I notice this, I feel this, and don't sneaky it like, I notice that you haven't been da 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 da. No, that's still blame. So keep it to like, I notice that I'm feeling XYZ. I notice that I'm doing XYZ. Once you're clear on what's routine or flat, start brainstorming ways to change that. Is there a way that one of you is not showing up fully and that person needs to shift that? And is there a date by which you want to check in about it? Let's say 2 weeks later, the person says, yes, okay, I'm going to show up differently, and you put a date on the calendar to check in about it. So there's some accountability, and you're tracking together how it feels. Is there a way you've both been dialing it in? And if so, how do you shift and place more attention on one another and on your union, on the connection between you? Is it a bandwidth issue? Like you're both stretched so thin that you just do not have bandwidth to attend to the relationship. You're barely scraping by because of everything on your plates. In that case, could you get some things off your plate, both of you, and turn that bandwidth that was utilized by that thing that you're shifting, turn that attention and that bandwidth to recharge your relationship so you actually have space for your connection? Thank you so much for tuning in. If you are watching the replay, I'd love to know. Give me a hashtag replay in the comments because I'd love to know who sees this. If there's a takeaway and you want to let me know, I'd love to know that too. You can use hashtag takeaway, hashtag nugget. If you have a question, let me know that too. And I'm Marie Elizabeth Molly, and I'm a relationship transformation expert, and I help women transform the patterns that tend to get in the way of love and connection in their relationships. And so they can create thriving, loving, connected, juicy, fun, pleasurable, delicious relationships. So if there are no further questions, are there any further questions? Thank you so much for tuning in. And I'm a sign off. Until next time, I'll see you next week. And until then, remember that a great relationship starts with you.